welcome to the Deep Dive. If you are joining us today, do yourself a favor right now and hit that like button and subscribe to the show.
Yeah, you are absolutely going to want to stick around for this one.
You really are.
Huh.
We have a massive, just incredibly dense analysis lined up for you. Today, our mission is to embark on a comprehensive, no-holds-barred review of an explosive, ultra-long, and honestly, highly controversial new ebook.
Highly controversial is almost an understatement.
Right. It's called Protocols of the Elders of Redpill by Conrad Riker. The subtitle alone gives you a sense of it. What your father failed to teach you about women's deceitful, emasculating nature. We're looking at a text that is really not for the faint of heart.
No, it is definitely not.
It is positioned as this intense, unvarnished survival guide, and it's written specifically for a men's rights activist audience and red-pilled manosphere men.
And the hook of this book, the reason it's generating so much heat online right now, is that the author claims to completely decode the hidden history of our institutions.
Right. He attempts to explain exactly how these institutions operated before they were, in his view, captured by feminists and Marxists.
Exactly. And from there, he provides a very specific, highly escalated tactical playbook for surviving what he basically views as a systematically rigged game.
So we're going to extract the core arguments, the tactical advice, and the evolutionary psychology claims straight from the text, going deep into the actual mechanics of what this manifesto is teaching its readers. And right off the bat, if you want to read the full, unfiltered manual for yourself, just to see exactly what we are analyzing today, you should check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book.
And you should follow the author at Conrad and Riker at Substack.
Definitely do that. But before we dive into the actual architecture of his arguments, I think we need to lay down some parameters.
Yes, it is absolutely vital that we establish the ground rules for today's deep dive. We are covering highly politically charged content here.
Very charged.
So I want to make it explicitly clear to you, the listener, that we are never taking sides on these issues. We are not endorsing the viewpoints, the politics, or the gender theories contained in this book.
Not at all.
Our role today is strictly analytical. We are acting as impartial guides to convey and report on the ideas exactly as they are presented in the original source material.
Right. Whether the author is critiquing left-wing progressive policies or right-wing institutional norms, our goal is simply to lay out his arguments and the logic he uses to build them so you can understand the discourse that's currently shaping this specific cultural movement.
Precisely. We are just looking at the blueprint.
So with the ground rules set, let's start where the author starts, which is the biological baseline.
The foundation of his whole worldview.
Yeah. The book kicks off with a very aggressive central premise, which is that gender equality is an evolutionary impossibility.
He argues that you simply cannot socially condition away 200,000 years of sexual selection.
Right. He claims that human DNA literally wires men to build, provide, and protect, while it wires women to seek out those providers. But the thing is, he doesn't just leave it at that cliche, men are from Mars, women are from Venus level.
No, he anchors this in specific evolutionary psychology. He relies heavily on the work of biological anthropologist David Buss.
The 37 culture study, right?
Exactly. He specifically cites Buss's famous 37 culture study. And for those who might not be familiar with the granular details of that research, Buss looked at mate selection criteria across vastly different cultures.
We're talking industrialized Western nations,
Yeah.
all the way to rural agrarian societies.
Right. And the finding was remarkably consistent. Across the board, women placed a significantly higher premium on a mate's financial prospects, ambition, and industriousness than men did.
And the book uses this research to argue that female hypergamy, which is that instinctual drive for women to seek higher status, resource-rich mates, is a hardwired universal human trait.
He frames it as a reproductive strategy optimized for the survival of offspring in ancestral environments. His main point is that this drive does not simply evaporate just because we invented air conditioning in corporate HR departments.
I want to pause on that, though. If his entire premise is that men are biologically hardwired to be providers and builders, how does he reconcile that with the modern white-collar environment we live in today?
He creates a very sharp contrast using some vivid imagery.
Yeah, he tells the reader to go look at any construction site at noon. He points out the men with sweaty backs hauling rebar. He claims that male biology literally built the pyramids, while modern, what he calls estrogen-fueled committees just sit around and debate pottery designs.
But the reality is, most men today aren't building pyramids. They are sitting in those exact same committees.
Right. Which brings us to the friction point.
That is exactly the friction point he's highlighting. He argues that the modern corporate environment, with its diversity seminars and inclusion initiatives, is trying to force a false narrative of blank slate equality onto a species that is fundamentally not a blank slate.
He argues that biology just doesn't care about your diversity inclusion scores.
Exactly. When you take biological imperatives like male aggression, competitiveness, and the drive to build and conquer, and you place them in a sterilized corporate environment that labels those exact traits as toxic, you create a systemic crisis.
And he points to real-world fallout from this. He heavily cites the case of James Damore.
The engineer who was fired from Google back in 2018.
Right. Damore wrote that internal memo citing similar biological and psychological research. He was talking about innate gender differences regarding interests in people versus things, basically trying to explain the gender gap in tech without defaulting to claims of systemic sexism.
And the author uses Damore's firing as empirical proof of his thesis. His argument is that the corporate world will actively destroy you if you point out evolutionary facts.
Right, if institutions actively deny the biological reality of their citizens, those institutions inherently begin to punish male instincts.
The system is essentially set up so that natural male strengths are constantly weaponized against men, turning their biological blueprint into a professional and social liability.
Okay, so if society is inherently punishing these biological instincts, as he claims, where does that leave the ultimate societal institution? I mean, marriage.
He completely deconstructs the concept of matrimony.
Yeah, he doesn't view the wedding ring as a romantic gesture at all. He frames modern marriage not as a partnership, but as what he calls voluntary enslavement.
He describes it as a high-stakes casino game that is entirely rigged against men, where you are essentially betting half your net worth that she won't get bored.
And the phrasing he uses to describe this dynamic is incredibly provocative. He calls it the state as the wife's boyfriend.
To understand how he gets to that extreme conclusion, we have to look at his historical timeline. He pinpoints the introduction of no-fault divorce laws, which began in California around 1970, as the exact moment the marriage contract was fundamentally broken.
Because before 1970, if you wanted a divorce, you generally had to prove fault, right? Like
Yeah.
infidelity, abuse, abandonment.
Yes. No-fault divorce made it unilateral. Either party could dissolve the contract at any time for any reason or literally no reason at all.
And the author argues that this legal shift transformed family courts into massive wealth redistribution engines.
He argues it monetizes male disposability.
That's the phrase, yeah. It takes a husband's labor, his overtime, his physical sacrifice, and turns it into community property that can just be seized without cause.
And he contrasts this financial vulnerability with reproductive biology, pointing at a very stark asymmetry.
Right, he says women hold 100% of the reproductive veto power from the pill to Plan B to abortion, yet men are held 100% financially accountable for the outcome of pregnancy, completely regardless of their consent.
And the book is absolutely packed with harrowing anecdotes to illustrate the legal mechanics of this.
Oh, the stories are brutal. She spends a significant amount of time on a guy named John from San Diego.
The tech startup guy.
Yeah. John built a $2 million tech startup from his garage. His wife files for divorce under California's no-fault laws in 2019, and her cited reason, emotional neglect, because John was working 80-hour weeks to build the company.
Let's examine the legal mechanics of that specific anecdote, because that is where the author's argument really sharpens.
Go ahead.
In a community property state like California, the court doesn't look at who actually wrote the code or who pitched the venture capitalists. It only looks at the asset created during the timeline of the marriage.
So the court awarded her half of a company she never touched.
Exactly. The author details how the business had to be valuated, how John had to leverage himself into massive debt just to buy out her half, and how he ultimately lost control of the board.
And now, according to the book, John is paying alimony out of his unemployment checks while his ex-wife is living in Bali.
The author's dark comedy here is noting that family law attorneys call this destruction equitable distribution.
It's wild. Then there's the story of Mike, a 45-year-old truck driver from Ohio. This one is really about the sheer physical toll.
Right, the blue-collar example.
Mike wakes up at 4 a.m. every single day just to cover a $3,800 monthly alimony payment. Meanwhile, his ex-wife hasn't let him see his kids in 2 years, and she's posting Instagram stories from a Cancun timeshare that is essentially funded by his overtime.
The author uses these stories to claim this isn't just a bad roll of the dice for a few unlucky guys, it is a systemic feature.
He backs this up with U.S. Census data, claiming that divorced men pay $100 billion yearly in alimony and child support. 100 billion.
And that between 86 to 97% of all alimony payers are men.
So to explain the trigger for these divorces, he points to a Harvard study that tracked 10,000 couples.
And the study found that when men lose their jobs, 89% of divorces are initiated by women.
89%. The author synthesizes this data with his earlier point about hypergamy. He argues that modern wives basically act like corporate raiders.
Right. They liquidate the partnership at the first sign of red ink because their biology demands a resource provider. And the state acting as the enforcer, the boyfriend hands them the legal guillotine to execute the split profitably.
Okay, so if you follow his logic to its natural endpoint, you really have to ask, how does an entire legal and societal system reach a point where it so brazenly exploits half the population? How did the laws get written this way?
The author's answer to that is a sweeping theory of institutional capture by feminist and Marxist ideology.
What he refers to as the gynocracy.
Yes, the gynocracy. The author lays out a timeline of how foundational institutions, education, the courts, the media, and corporate HR departments have been systematically hijacked.
The core of this theory is that the historical builders of civilization, who were predominantly men, have been erased from textbooks and cultural memory.
And in their place, a new narrative has been installed where male strength, ambition, and achievement are pathologized as toxic masculinity.
He goes directly after mainstream economic narratives to prove this, specifically the wage gap.
Right. For decades, the prevailing argument has been that women make less than men for the exact same work due to systemic sexism.
But the author completely rejects the premise of comparison. He says, look, if we want to talk about a gap, let's talk about the death gap.
He cites OSHA data showing that men make up 93% of all workplace fatalities. 93%.
The author points out that men are the ones doing the lethal, physically destroying jobs. Logging, coal mining, deep-sea fishing, working on high-voltage power lines.
His argument is that men earn more in the aggregate simply because they take on massive physical risks and work disproportionate amounts of overtime.
While women generally gravitate towards safer, climate-controlled, flexible roles, he notes the irony that demands for equal pay never seem to be accompanied by demands for equal representation on deep-sea oil rigs.
He applies this theory of institutional capture across several sectors, starting with the campus and legal environments.
He argues that due process has been entirely dismantled for men. He cites the Duke lacrosse case from 2006, where athletes had their lives derailed by false rape claims while the accuser faced no real consequences.
But he really zeroes in on Title IX kangaroo courts on college campuses. The legal standard here is crucial to understand his critique.
Right, because in a normal criminal court, to convict someone, the standard is beyond a reasonable doubt. You have to be almost entirely certain of their guilt.
But on college campuses, Title IX tribunals operate on a preponderance of evidence standard.
Which legally means just 51% certainty.
Exactly. It means it is more likely than not. The author points out that a literal coin flip chance of guilt can get a man expelled, his transcripts ruined, and his future destroyed.
Often without the right to even cross-examine his accuser or have legal representation present in the room.
He highlights the mattress girl hoax at Columbia University, where a student carried a mattress around campus to protest an alleged assault, despite the accused man being cleared by the university and actually later winning a settlement against the school.
The author argues that universities have just become grievance factories where accusing a man is a fast track to social status and media praise.
In his media critique in the book is just as aggressive.
He talks about how corporate media actively demonizes its own male consumer base. He brings up that Gillette ad from a few years ago that lectured men about toxic masculinity.
The author points out that Gillette suffered an $8 billion write-down shortly after running a campaign that fundamentally insulted the men buying their razors.
He also goes after Disney, claiming they weaponize fairy tales to socially engineer children.
His analysis of Disney is a really interesting look into cultural programming.
Yeah, he argues that in classic tales like The Little Mermaid, Ariel trades her literal voice and agency just to chase a man,
which he frames as a projection of female hypergamy masked as romance.
Right. And conversely, in modern movies like Frozen, the strong female lead, Elsa, isolates herself in an ice castle, creates a massive disaster, and then men have to brave the elements to clean up the mess.
He argues that Hollywood consistently portrays male protectors as violent or controlling, while female characters engaging in the exact same aggressive behavior are praised as empowering or badass.
And this extends deeply into the corporate world through diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. He describes mandatory unconscious bias training as modern corporate conversion therapy.
He paints this picture of men being forced into conference rooms, sitting under fluorescent lights, just being told by HR consultants that their male brains are inherently wired for oppression.
He cites an example of Boeing allegedly tying executive compensation to diversity metrics. He claims this incentivizes the firing or marginalization of highly skilled male engineers just to meet quotas.
What he is outlining here is a synchronized assault across all cultural pillars.
Right, whether you were in a university classroom, sitting in a corporate boardroom, or watching a movie on your couch, the messaging is uniform. Your natural male instincts are defective.
And this leads directly to the author's theory of a massive psychological trap designed specifically to break men down.
He calls it the masculinity double bind, and it is a completely lose-lose scenario.
Society, media, and women constantly demand that men open up, show their feelings, and be vulnerable.
But the author claims that the second a man actually takes off his armor and does this, society actively punishes him for it.
The author introduces a concept he calls the anti-vulnerability doctrine. His position relies heavily on his earlier claims about female biology.
Right, if female hypergamy is a drive for a strong, stoic, unshakable provider, then that biology fundamentally rejects male weakness.
Therefore, showing genuine emotional vulnerability, things like fears, insecurities, financial anxieties to a female partner, leads to an immediate and irreversible loss of respect.
He argues that any weakness a man shares will eventually be logged, filed away, and weaponized against him during an argument, or worse, in divorce court.
He states very bluntly, emotional honesty is just handing your enemies the knife.
He views the modern demand for male vulnerability not as empathy, but as a trap designed to test a man's frame. If he breaks and cries, he fails the evolutionary test.
He illustrates this with a really tragic story about a guy named Dave.
Dave is a successful CEO who went to marriage counseling with his wife because she complained he was emotionally distant and closed off.
Right, and after weeks of pressure from the therapist and his wife, Dave finally breaks down.
He cries in the session, sharing his deep insecurities about his business and his fear of failure.
And according to the book, 2 months later, his wife filed for divorce, took the house, and actually used his emotional confession in the counseling session as proof to her lawyers that he was unstable and unfit to manage their assets.
The author backs up this anecdote with speed dating data from UCLA. The data claims that 78% of women subconsciously recoil, literally showing micro-expressions of disgust when men display emotional vulnerability or self-doubt.
Because of this dynamic, the author prescribes a highly tactical Stoics toolkit. It is entirely focused on physiological and psychological control.
When a man feels rage, panic, or grief rising, the author explains that this is a neurobiological event called an amygdala hijack.
Right. The amygdala is the emotional threat center of the brain. When it detects a threat like a screaming partner or a stressful confrontation, it floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline,
which effectively bypasses the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logic and rational decision-making.
The author claims that modern relationship arguments are often subconsciously designed by women to trigger this exact biological short circuit in men, causing them to lash out or say something damaging.
So to combat this, the toolkit includes military-style tactical breathing, inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 6, just to manually slow the heart rate.
But the tactic that really stands out is the coin flip.
Yes, the coin flip. He advises men to carry a heavy physical token in their pocket, like a silver coin. When an argument starts and emotions boil, you reach into your pocket and flip the coin in your fingers.
The logic behind the coin is really fascinating. Flipping the coin creates a 13-second physical and mental buffer.
The author claims that 13 seconds is the biological window required to let the initial adrenaline spike pass and force the logical prefrontal cortex back online.
He is essentially teaching men to install a mental kill switch. You ground yourself in the physical sensation of the coin before you say or do something that can be recorded, weaponized, and used against you legally.
He takes this stoicism a step further with what he calls outcome visualization.
He says you have to prepare for everyday conflicts the exact same way you prepare for a fire drill. You have to visualize the absolute worst-case scenario so you aren't blindsided.
He gives a very practical example. Let's say your partner demands a $5,000 designer purse.
The natural male reaction might be to get angry, call her materialistic, and start a screaming match.
But the author says that is a failure of frame. Instead, you respond with cold spreadsheets and logic. You pull up the financial software and say, Spending 5% of our annual net income on a depreciating leather asset harms our long-term financial security trajectory. Request denied.
You do not give her the emotional reaction she is looking for. You just shut it down with deadpan math.
By maintaining this unbreakable stoic frame, the author argues that men can protect themselves from emotional manipulation.
And this emotional discipline is the absolute prerequisite for the author's next set of strategies, which deal with navigating the incredibly treacherous waters of modern romance and digital dating.
Which brings us to his analysis of dating in the modern era. He characterizes modern dating apps as a female supremacy playground.
He offers what he literally calls guerrilla warfare tactics for romance.
If you are out there dating right now, the book claims you are walking through a minefield and you really need to understand the brutal economics behind the screens.
He introduces the concept of the Tinder tax and the 80-20 rule, which is essentially the Pareto principle applied to digital mating markets.
Relying on data scraped from dating apps, he argues that the algorithms have created a hyper-efficient sorting mechanism where 80% of women are exclusively competing for the top 10-20% of men.
These are the highest earners, the tallest, the most conventionally attractive, what the manosphere calls chads.
This algorithmic sorting leaves the vast majority of average men fighting over scraps, constantly swiping, and paying for premium app features just to be ignored by women who are holding out for the top tier.
The examples he uses to prove this are wild.
Yeah, his team ran an experiment on Tinder to prove the hypergamy point. They created a profile for a very attractive fitness model type guy and labeled his job as a tech CEO.
He got 427 matches in a single week.
Then they took the exact same photos, created a new profile, and labeled him unemployed.
And he got exactly 11 matches.
Yeah. The author says this proves women don't care about your personality or your looks as much as they care about your resource provisioning capacity. They want a provider, not an equal.
And if an average man does manage to secure a date and enter a relationship, the author warns of the oxytocin ambush, which he refers to as the cuddle scam.
Oxytocin is the hormone released during physical intimacy and postcoital bonding.
The author claims that this pillow talk is not romantic at all. It is an evolutionary tool deployed by women.
The biological function of releasing oxytocin is to bond the male to the female, ensuring he sticks around to provide resources and protection.
So the author warns men not to make any financial or emotional commitments while under the influence of this hormone.
He also gives highly specific tactical advice on how to end relationships. He advocates for the gradual fade over ghosting.
I was wondering why he wouldn't just say cut contact, but his reasoning is actually chilling.
He claims that abrupt ghosting can trigger extreme female retaliation. He details cases where men who ghosted were suddenly hit with false allegations at their workplace or on social media by vindictive exes.
The gradual fade, slowly becoming more boring, less responsive, and less useful, forces the woman to initiate the breakup, which he says neutralizes the threat of retaliation.
But here's where his advice crosses into extreme paranoia. He advises men to keep sterile Q-tips in the glove compartment of their car.
This is regarding what he calls paternity fraud.
He cites numbers from the UK claiming that up to 30% of men listed as fathers on birth certificates are not the biological parents.
His advice is that if a man has a child, he must secretly swab the inside of the child's cheek with those sterile Q-tips and send it to a private lab to ensure he isn't bankrolling another man's genetics.
The legal implications of this are incredibly complex, because finding out a child isn't yours years down the line often doesn't absolve you of child support obligations in many jurisdictions.
Which only reinforces the author's point about the state trapping men.
This entire worldview of constant threat assessment is formalized in his war room threat assessment matrix.
He categorizes every single interaction with a woman into color-coded zones, exactly like military doctrine.
A green zone is a barista or a cashier. It's low risk, but he advises keeping it strictly transactional. He cites a man who was sued for workplace harassment just for smiling too long at a barista.
An amber zone is a workplace or social event. Here you must use deflection, never drink alcohol around female colleagues, and always park your car facing the exit for a quick departure.
The red zone covers dating apps and dates where you must screen rigorously for entitlement.
And finally, the black zone is family court. In the black zone, you must assume everything you say is being recorded, twisted, and used to destroy you. You must wear metaphorical and perhaps literal body armor.
Which is a perfect segue into how the author suggests building that armor. The book synthesizes physical dominance with financial invisibility.
On the physical front, the author claims that mainstream dietary advice, specifically the push toward veganism and plant-based diets, is actually a systemic plot designed to lower male testosterone, decrease aggression, and make men docile and easier to manage.
He shares a crazy personal story about this. He says he almost died after trusting a holistic vegan nutritionist. His testosterone plummeted to 98 nanograms per deciliter.
To put that in perspective, he says that is the hormone level of a prepubescent girl.
He lost his muscle mass, became depressed, and his girlfriend left him for a butcher who ate ribeyes.
So he completely biohacked his biology to rebound.
He got his testosterone up to 950 by alternating weeks of eating raw elk liver and bison heart, combined with 48-hour dry fasts where he consumed no food or water.
He argues that your body must be an absolute weapon. He even talks about using Navy SEAL sleep deprivation protocols, staying awake and blasting death metal for 72 hours straight to harden his mind for the trauma of representing himself in his own divorce court proceedings.
While he is forging this physical armor, he is simultaneously building a financial fortress.
The author's economic philosophy is nomad capitalism.
The goal is to starve the beast of the state. The same state, he argues, acts as the wife's boyfriend in divorce court by legally and cryptographically removing your assets from its reach.
He provides a detailed playbook for hiding wealth. He recommends setting up offshore trusts in jurisdictions like Panama, the Cook Islands, or Belize.
In these jurisdictions, assets are hidden from public records, and local courts generally do not recognize U.S. family court judgments, making it nearly impossible for an ex-wife to seize those funds.
He also talks about Delaware dynasty trusts, right?
Yes, Delaware dynasty trusts are designed to pass wealth down across generations while bypassing generation-skipping transfer taxes and shielding assets from creditors, including ex-spouses.
He is also a huge proponent of decentralized finance. He explicitly mentions using crypto mixers like Tornado Cash and privacy coins like Monero to make your financial footprint completely untraceable on the blockchain.
Furthermore, he highlights utilizing Puerto Rico's Act 22, which is now part of Act 60. This law allows U.S. citizens who establish bona fide residency in Puerto Rico to legally shield their investment and crypto capital gains from federal taxes.
The strategy is to amass wealth where the gynocracy cannot tax it, track it, or award it in a divorce settlement.
He pairs this financial invisibility with serious digital defense tactics. He tells men to set up geofencing boundaries on their phones around their homes and workplaces.
If a toxic ex crosses that invisible GPS line, the phone automatically triggers an alert to the police, creating a time-stamped paper trail to prove she is violating boundaries or restraining orders.
He advises creating a fake LinkedIn profile as camouflage. He suggests pretending to be a mid-level manager obsessed with something incredibly boring, like crochet or scamp collecting. So women who use LinkedIn to hunt for high-earning targets will skip right over you.
He even tells men to have a go bag packed in the trunk of their car with thousands in cash, a passport, and keys to a foreign Airbnb, ready for a sudden escape if a false accusation drops at work.
But I have to ask, living in a geofence compound with a go bag, eating raw elk liver, and hiding behind a fake crochet profile, isn't that just a different kind of prison? Is that really freedom?
The author actually addresses that exact critique. He acknowledges the exhaustion of living like Jason Bourne.
But his rationale is that this extreme paranoia is the price of sovereignty in a hostile system. He views it not as a prison, but as a fortified bunker.
However, he also recognizes that individual survival, just hiding your money and getting in shape, isn't enough to change the societal trajectory.
He believes that if you are constantly in hiding, you haven't won. That realization leads to his ultimate thesis, a call for systemic rebellion and the creation of entirely parallel societies.
Unpacking the final chapters, we see his ultimate call to action. He is telling men to engage in the MGTOW philosophy, men going their own way, but he wants to escalate it.
He doesn't just want men to walk away into the woods. He wants them to build new, exclusively male-centric structures to replace the ones they are abandoning.
The core of this rebellion is financial abolitionism, executed through what he calls the Lysistrata Protocol.
In ancient Greek comedy, Lysistrata convinced women to withhold sex to force men to end a war. The author flips this entirely.
He argues for a total male marriage and labor strike. He posits that if men stop participating in the marriage industrial complex, stop striving for corporate promotions, and stop paying exorbitant taxes, they stop funding their own oppression.
Without male productivity and tax revenue, he argues that gynocracy starves and collapses.
He also calls for a religious reboot. He rejects modern mainstream churches, which he calls feminized clergy focused on inclusive prayer circles and feelings.
And he argues for a return to militant, orthodox, traditional religious roles where men are the undisputed spiritual heads of their households and communities.
He shares an incredible anecdote about a group of men in Vermont who put this into practice.
They pooled their money, bought a deconsecrated chapel, ripped down all the inclusive banners, reinstated the traditional Latin Mass, and literally guarded the doors of the church with AR-15 rifles when the local bishop sent a cease and desist order.
They created a micro-society where outside rules no longer applied.
The examples of brotherhood extend into the economic sphere as well. He describes a Masonic lodge that mobilized during the pandemic.
They used their internal network to quietly place 30,000 unemployed brothers into jobs, completely bypassing corporate HR departments and diversity quotas.
He outlines how men are pooling their capital after terrible divorces to build massive private construction and logistics empires that explicitly blacklist gynocentric clients or vendors.
But he also knows men still have to interact with the existing system occasionally, which is why he outlines political jujitsu.
The legal jujitsu advice is ruthless. It is full-scale lawfare.
He demands that men constantly record their interactions, relying on one-party consent laws in certain states to secretly capture audio evidence of women lying, admitting to false abuse claims, or threatening them.
In family court, he advises men to play dirtier than their opponents. If there is a custody battle, he suggests subpoenaing an ex's best friend's Tinder messages to prove the ex is bringing dangerous men around the kids.
Or hiring forensic accountants to dig up secret OnlyFans earnings to show a judge she's hiding assets and committing perjury.
He also highly recommends demanding jury trials in family court or civil disputes whenever legally possible.
The strategy here is based on his belief that family court judges are ideologically captured cogs in the feminist machine. A judge will reflexively side with the woman.
However, a jury of 12 ordinary citizens, especially if you can select working-class men for the jury, is far more likely to see through a woman's tears and respond to hard evidence and logical appeals.
It is about bypassing the compromise referee and taking the case directly to the crowd.
Finally, he talks about legacy. How do you leave a mark if the mainstream system wants to erase you from the history books?
He suggests building physical libraries filled with banned, politically incorrect books.
He talks about passing down patents and intellectual property through those offshore Belize trusts, so the state can't tax your descendants.
And he recognizes the asymmetrical power of the internet. He claims that dank memes and digital defiance are actually the most potent weapons in the cultural war.
He argues that encrypted internet absurdity, meme warfare, and viral red pill content will outlast physical pyramids because decentralized ideas can't be censored, fired, or destroyed by feminist academics.
Stepping back and looking at the entirety of this deep dive, we have covered a truly massive, highly controversial scarp.
We've traced the author's arguments from his fundamental claims about evolutionary biology, David Buss's studies, and the mechanics of female hypergamy.
We've examined his theory of the state-sponsored theft of the marriage plantation, the detailed history of no-fault divorce, and the institutional capture by feminism, highlighted by the OSHA death gap and Title IX tribunals.
We've dissected the neurobiology of his stoic psychological defenses, his guerrilla dating tactics, and the extreme paranoia of his war room matrix.
We've looked at his blueprints for forging physical body armor and offshore financial fortresses using Act 22 and crypto mixers.
Ultimately, we explored his final call for a complete male opt-out through the Lysistrata Protocol and the building of parallel brotherhoods.
I must reiterate as we conclude that this deep dive has impartially reported on these highly charged, red-pilled viewpoints. Our intention is to give you, the listener, a thorough analytical understanding of the arguments, the legal theories, and the biological claims that are currently shaping the manosphere, absolutely, without endorsing the text or its political stances.
We have covered incredible ground today. We've looked under the hood of an ideology that is actively trying to deconstruct modern societal norms. But before we go, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
Consider the macroeconomic implications of the author's endgame. If the book's proposed marriage strike and the movement toward complete financial disengagement continue to grow as a statistical trend, if millions of men truly do follow this playbook, stop marrying, stop striving for taxable corporate promotions, and hide their wealth in offshore trusts and privacy coins, what happens to the macroeconomic foundation of a society?
Right, because as the author points out, the infrastructure of society relies heavily on male labor and dangerous jobs, and the social safety net relies massively on male tax revenue to function.
If the builders and funders walk away, does the system self-correct? Or does it fundamentally destabilize the modern economic order?
That is definitely a massive question to chew on. Right, that wraps up our deep dive for today. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you need to like and subscribe to the show right now so you don't miss our future deep dives.
And remember, to fully grasp the raw, incisive details of this manifesto for yourself and see the arguments firsthand, check Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook.
And don't forget to follow the author at Conrad N. Riker at Substack. Thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.